So you're
It's
saying
logic.
the Philippines had always been a hard sell?
Look at our power consumption. We're a manufacturing desert. Quality of the workforce. Data programmers are actually better in Vietnam. They do quality education in a local language, very good professional civil service, policies, and the execution of those policies for those sectors. To the credit of this administration, I think their stated policy priorities are all correct.
As independent director, doing some direct advisory work and acting as senior advisor to private equity and venture capital funds. Joining us now for Thought Leaders on his private sector view of the Philippine economy, Stephen CuUnjieng. Interesting that you mentioned the Philippines and Thailand and sealing these deals in these economies at a time the global financial crisis was just coming to a close. And you mentioned restructuring and certain investments needed in Thailand. Where was the Philippines at on the list of foreign investors during that point in time? After the global financial crisis?
I'm being very honest, non-existent.
Why?
Because I'll be really blunt, we're a manufacturing desert. If you look at the scale of manufacturing, and I'm not talking about light assembly, real manufacturing, and I'm sorry to be so blunt, an embarrassment compared to our neighbors. Apart from food, we don't really have manufacturing. You look at other countries where they have cars, they have steel, they have integrated using their resources, petrochemicals and all that. We don't. So relatively speaking, there wasn't that much investment into the Philippines because there wasn't that much to invest in. I mean, you might want to start a bank. That's not really, you don't need to buy a bank to start a bank here. So it's financial services, BPOs, and some light assembly, semiconductors, things like that. So unless you're building malls and buildings to house these people, there isn't manufacturing. While the best proof of how bad our manufacturing is look at our power consumption. We have about $3,000 GDP, 115 million people. And what is our peak power consumption for the country? 15,000 megawatts. All right, let me give you two examples. Thailand, with double our GDP per capita, 70,000 megawatts, 70 million people, and about 7,000 GDP per capita. If I remember right, it has about 40,000 megawatts demand, with 1/3 less people. Vietnam, which everybody's saying is the investment darling now for direct investment. Vietnam, with 96 million people and 2,700 GDP per capita moving up, uses 60,000 megawatts, 4 times the Philippines. That's the difference. Because it's one thing to run the air conditioning in this building. It's another to be in manufacturing. Like if you have an integrated steel plant where you're changing iron ore to billets, your 40 to 50% of your cost is power. Because you're literally changing a raw material into a finished product. That uses a lot of power. The fact that that Vietnam uses 4 times our power with 10% less people than us and 10% lower GDP.
So that was the perception or the reality.
That's the reality.
As you see,
and everybody knows that.
In the global financial crisis. Yeah. But what about right now?
It's the
Has
same.
that reality changed from an investment banker's point of view and the foreign investors that are trying to look for assets or countries to invest in?
I'm obviously associated as an advisor to one of the largest largest Asia-focused only PE firm. And we look at opportunities through the region, including the Philippines. They mention all these industries they like. And they say, who are the players in the Philippines? And I say none. Because it doesn't exist. Because we just import all of it. We import all these finished products. And the other Asian countries make them. Now, You'll say, why is that? Companies and investors generally are rational people. Let's assume I'm going to start this manufacturing plant, and 40% of my cost is power. Even if power exists, if it's 30 to 50% more than in my neighboring countries, it's like I'm starting a basketball game down by 20 points rather than 0-0. So if you were sane, why would you come to a place where something that is 40 to 50% of your cost base is 20 to 30% higher to begin with?
So you're saying
logic.
The Philippines had always been a hard sell all throughout the decades?
Ever, frankly.
In your 36 years as
Yes.
an investment banker.
And that's why you've seen the manufacturing pace go down and down and down and down. And it's a tragedy. My job is to sell what makes sense for the
Correct.
buyer and the seller.
So what makes sense in the Philippines? There must be something
Well,
that
that's why,
makes it
I'll be
sellable
very
and
honest. You see,
attractive.
I will be very honest. A lot of the M&A has been in country from one buyer to another when there have been new strategies or exiting opportunities. The little M&A that you've seen cross-border has more been in service companies, Metro Pacific hospitals, telecom towers. But you don't see this basic industry company being bought by the last time that happened was in the financial crisis when the cement companies were generally bought out by foreign companies. That's it. And if you look at manufacturing here, primarily it's cement and food. Yeah, URC, Mondenisin, San Miguel. I mean, but apart from that, you tell me what you see in other countries: industrial gases, car assembly, toys, appliances, white goods. None of them are made here anymore. They're all imported.
from your point of view, how did they get from here to there?
Who, we
for
or them?
Vietnam, for Indonesia, Thailand?
Okay.
What's the one sort of similarity that they have that we should have so that we can progress just as much as they have?
I've seen this painfully because I had 3 clients in basically 2017 to 2019 who were basically, most of their production was in China. And because of political tensions, they weren't going to shut down China, but they wanted to have a second major source. One of them was even owned by an overseas Filipino, okay? Filipino-Chinese. And all 3 of them were getting ready to relocate here. One was a software services company, one was a pharmaceutical assembly company, and the other one was also a tech company. All 3 moved to Vietnam. One was even a Filipino Cebuano, and he even came here, was already picking the site, everything. All 3 went to Vietnam, depending which it was. They all chose Vietnam over the Philippines. Now, why? 3 reasons. 1, and I'm just saying this not to be critical, but to be honest, because we can talk about changing laws and changing things, but what is the one most important determinant for someone to invest? Profit. If you're not going to make money, you can put all the incentives. Myanmar has plenty of incentives. Okay, but if you're not going to make money, you're not going to go. And if you're going to make a lot of money, you'll put up with it. Why do people pay more taxes in the US to live in California or New York rather than Wyoming or North Dakota? Because they have jobs and can make more money in New York. Will you pay state tax but you can earn 7 digits, or go to a place with no tax and earn 5 digits? It's making money. So why do people go to Vietnam and think they can make money versus come here and think it's too tough? 1, power is cheap. If you're manufacturing, as I said, anywhere from 25 to 50% of your cost, depending on your industry's power. So if you start out already with the deficit there, Why will you come here? And the fact is, we have seen manufacturing dissipate in the last 40 years in this country. Farming for that, that's the first. Second, the quality of the workforce. I'm very sorry to say that, like for the tech company, they said the data programmers are actually better in Vietnam. And they said the graduates from the second-tier university are equal or better than the graduates of our top universities. And the people in the top universities here, they want to work in a good building in Metro Manila and everything. In Vietnam, they like being in the second-tier cities because they can get the same salary as if they were in Ho Chi Minh or Hanoi, but the money goes further. And so, I'm sorry to say the quality of education, because we've been having ridiculous debates which have been settled in other countries 50 years ago. We're arguing again whether we should teach people in English or Filipino. Every country has settled that issue. It is not facility in a foreign language, it is depth of comprehension. And you will always understand slower if you're learning in a non-native language. You can, all of them teach comprehensive English as a second language, but they do quality education in a local language, and that's why their scores are better. Do you think it's how well you can speak English on the phone that will determine whether you write better or worse code? That you can make the right decisions engineering-wise as you fix an assembly line or adapt a product? It's not language facility, it's comprehension. And we're also behind. And the third, besides energy and infrastructure costs, quality of the workforce and their education, the third, honestly, is the government, the support the government bureaucracy gives you. I always joke, in Vietnam, they have a one-stop shop. In the Philippines, it's part of the profits. Many times, you have one shop at every stop. I mean, I'll tell you a true story from one of my clients. They were in a animal feed business. They had a local partner, and then after having a good experience for 5 years, the local partner said, I'd like to retire, I'll sell out to you. So they did. So now it's 100% foreign owned. After that, the local mayor was trying to harass them in Vietnam, obviously asking for bribes and things like that. And so my client went to the Ministry of Trade office, the equivalent to the BOI, and said, what should I do? The BOI said, can you explain everything to us? They explained, it said, give us 2 weeks. They investigated and threw the mayor in jail.
But to be fair, the Anti-Red Tape Authority, that's an innovation from previous years.
Yes.
And that hasn't
I'm talking
attracted
about
foreign
effect
investor
versus
interest.
policy. I'm talking about in practice.
So what in the policy do we need to change?
I think it's execution. You know, people will forgive well-meaning but imperfect policies for excellent execution. I remember there's a great picture of General Patton in one of my Vietnamese clients' offices. He said, a good plan executed expertly today is better than a perfect plan executed in 2 weeks. You don't have to have perfect policies, perfect everything. You have to have good execution. And so, like, when they say you will be hassle-free, they meant it. And like, I'm not saying we all should live in a dictatorship and a one-party state, all that. No. But if you're a foreign investor and you're seeing that kind of support and that kind of execution of policy compared to what you'll have to do here, where will you go?
But to be fair, I mean, the countries that you mentioned, Vietnam and Thailand, they're not democracies. They're monarchical.
I agree.
So there's a difference.
I agree.
In government and the way the government's set up. So would that be a fair comparison?
Well,
with the way
okay,
execution goes in a democracy as the Philippines?
Okay, there's one of the things that I feel sad about in the Philippines is People say, how can there always be coups in Thailand and the tourists come back after 1 week? The foreign investors don't leave. Here, there's a coup attempt, it fails, and nobody comes for 10 years. My observation, I'm not going to say I'm correct, it's my observation. Those countries have a very good professional civil service. So while governments may come and go, cabinet ministers and politicians may come and go, there's a consensus on policy and there's a decent execution by the civil service and the bureaucracy, which is better than us. That's my observation. I'm sorry to be so honest, but
you mentioned the civil service. That came up about a year ago when you mentioned 4 focus areas that you wanted to see the new administration taking on. And one of them is professionalizing the civil service.
yes.
Education, infrastructure, and agriculture.
Still the same 1 year later.
How would you rate from a scale of 1 to 10?
I'd
after
rate it
1
an
year?
incomplete because I'm waiting to see. I mean, to the credit of this administration, I think their stated policy priorities are all correct. But the president is now entering his 11th month. And I'm waiting to see what are the policies and the execution of those policies for those sectors. I haven't seen them yet. So my grade is an incomplete because I don't know what they're going to do yet. He says we have to be self-sufficient in agricultural prime commodities. But for now, we're still importing, and I haven't seen what are the steps we're going to take to address that. I haven't seen how they're going to improve and professionalize the civil service, except that they're arguing about BBP and Land Bank and what should happen in the merger. But I haven't seen fundamental moves on addressing that, and then obviously the military pension. But I've not seen how they're going to make it better, not how they're dealing with existing issues and players. So I agree with those. Those are the 4 priorities I suggest. I'm happy the government has chosen to prioritize that plus other things, but I'm waiting to see how.
Is it a matter of just policy or
No,
execution
for me,
of both?
I honestly don't think we need. There's some things which desperately need new policies. The sugar purchasing regime, and that's basically, I wasn't born when that law was passed, and I'm 64 years old. If there's anything that's overdue for change, it's that. Like when I was in Thailand and Vietnam, if you look at the productivity, first of the finished product, the sugar mills, they're all modern in Thailand. That's why the productivity, the output of that mill is so much higher. But then what's really shocking is the agricultural yield per hectare for rice and sugar in Thailand and the Philippines and Vietnam. We should be happy they're as efficient they are, or we'd be starving. Because what if there's no rice to import? I'm not sure. I remember I was there, and there were people say, "Oh, it's so hard to do that in the Philippines because there are a lot of small farms." There are also small farms in Greece, in the US, in Thailand, in Vietnam. But what they've done is they've forced an effective co-op system on them so there would be best practices, mechanization, and scale. Like I was in Vietnam recently, I was traveling, and there was a carabao in this rice field. And my partner said to me, "Oh, that's just to eat." The carabao is not there for plowing, it's just for tourism so they can see it. And eventually the family will eat the carabao, okay? Because it's all mechanized. And even though this farm is small, and you basically need 1,000 farms of that size to be cost efficient, they're all part of a co-op. And they're doing that. Then you're part of a co-op, then it's a little more practical who gets irrigation, who gets support, who gets supplies, because it's no longer one farmer negotiating with whoever's the person granting this dispensation versus the next farmer. It's a co-op.
So in your 36 years as an investment banker looking from the outside in, what do you think is the one thing that the Philippines did right?
I think one of the things we did right unfortunately, is long-term not good. Which is since we have no jobs, we've exported our people. And it's sad because that comes at great social cost and family cohesion and national pride. But I mean, if you look at traditionally who creates trouble in countries, it's usually colonels in the military and lower middle class intellectuals. You look at who's behind all revolutionary movements. And I think the reason why we've had social stability and political stability in the country is the troublemakers are now all OFWs. They're not here. Can you imagine if the 10 million people who've emigrated or OFWs were here looking for jobs?
But there are unsung heroes. This is the group of people who power up our GDP through remittances.
And
so that's something to be proud of.
Well, I'm not saying proud of because it means
as a growth driver and for national pride.
My point is, you had to save the country by telling 10% of the country to leave, or their families will starve. I think the ultimate vote is not the vote for Marcos, Aquino, Arroyo, Duterte. It was the vote to leave the country. To say, I wouldn't have had the career I had if I stayed in Manila. You wouldn't have had the career you had if you stayed in Manila. We're very simple. We're both high-paid, white-collar OFWs at our time. And then we rode our global expertise to now be here. But if you hadn't, let's assume you stayed in ABS-CBN all your life, what would have happened? It would have been good. But why did you choose to go to Bloomberg? Why did I choose to leave PCI Capital, where I was the head of investment banking, to take a risk joining Morgan Grenfell and Solomon? While I remember, I had to hire people. It's so hard to get really good people in Thailand and Vietnam to leave local institutions because they're paid well and they see such opportunities there. Yet here, fine, everybody wants to go.
But that's the one part of the exodus, if you will, of OFWs and including expats.
Yes.
The other side is, or the other part of the equation is the return. You've come back, and so have others.
Yeah.
I've traveled with those who have come back because they've seen real growth. The very first person who ever came back was a hotelier who saw those cranes go up in the city and saw real growth. At a time, the GDP ran up beyond 7%. That was back in 2005.
I'm happy people have done that.
2015, in fact.
And in fact, I'm happy people have been brave. But it's the ratio. How many are coming back versus how many leave every year? That's the key. You look at India. When I went to business school in the 80s, the dream of every Indian, Bangladeshi, or Pakistani was to get a job in the US because there were no opportunities back. But look at what they've done since then to come going back. So you could say so now you've got two very clear examples of the results. Multi-billion-dollar Indian software and tech services companies, and practically all the CEOs of the major US tech companies are Indian. Really. Google, Microsoft, Facebook even, IBM, everybody. All right? Now, my point was, there will always be people who are aggressive, see opportunities, and say, I can come back and do better for myself. But collectively, are more coming back or more leaving? So, I don't want to be that negative.
But if there were more skilled professionals like yourself coming back, then that would be value to the country.
But we aren't.
An exodus
because there's less opportunity. So maybe for every Stephen CuUnjieng, and let's be honest, I didn't come back. I retired. There's a difference. Now, and I sit on boards. I'm very grateful. Many of my clients considered my work worthwhile that they, between investment banking. How can you tell whether somebody retired, somebody resigned, or somebody was fired?
How?
Okay. The person who retired has no office, has no staff, has no everything, because that means he or she really wanted to retire. The person who resigned within the end of the gardening leave period is at another firm. The person who was fired, although often they tell you just to resign, goes back to his home country and sets up his own firm because he still wants to be in the industry, but nobody wants to hire him.
But to be fair, your family are here, so that's as good as...
No, actually, my
you came
family's
home
not
for
here.
good.
My wife's here. Of my 3 kids, only one of them is here part of the time. My daughter, who's a historian. My son works for Morgan Stanley as a VP in their environmental sustainability group in New York. And my youngest son is with YouTube, with Google in Singapore. So I actually don't have family here. I mean, it's my wife and me and my daughter, who spends part of the time as a postdoctoral history fellow at Cambridge University because she's PhD from Yale, and her book was published by Columbia University Press, and now she's going to be a postdoctoral fellow.